think the beauty is empowerment and ownership. One of the areas like we want to grow in is like our leadership capacity and ownership. And I think about ownership, like where are our teams doing really well? They're amazing at getting results. They're amazing at making plans to get the results and implementing them. But there's also this concept of ownership, of like being able to articulate what they've done. I think this like ability to allow them to talk more has allowed them to have the ownership of helping them articulate a little bit more about what they're doing by giving them the platform of me speaking less, but also asking them really hard questions of like, hey, why'd you come up with that goal? Them being able to kind of have that platform has really helped them grow in their ownership.
Welcome to Build Your Culture Brand with Dr. Jay Rains. Successful leaders make building healthy culture a priority. Meet other leaders who are building a culture where people want to stay and know how to win together.
Hey leaders, welcome back to the Build Your Culture Brand podcast. I have with me today Nick Dose from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Jay, thanks so much for having me on. Excited to be here and talk to you a little bit more.
Nick is an amazing operator there in Cedar Rapids, Iowa at the Lindale location, and just enjoyed getting to know their team. As you look at your team now, you have several top leaders, and we kind of have this superpower or whatever, kryptonite. But what might they say is a leadership strength of yours that they rely on?
Yeah, so I think uniquely, one of the things that I'm really good at is moving with a sense of urgency and being able to solve problems very quickly. Like in my strengths finder, the way that I would be coined as or defined as is an activator. My Enneagram number is 8. And so that's an active challenger, someone that can kind of see the situation, call it out for what it is. But also I think I don't know what God put into me, but he gave me a high sense of urgency as well. And so like I'm able to like move and advance problems very quickly. And that's allowed us to kind of, continue the momentum, have a tenacity to win, get some excellent results. And I think that that's a superpower, so to speak, in your own words, that I would say I do really well as a leader.
So what works against you? What works against your leadership?
Yeah. So on the flip side, with that same thing, there can be some opportunities. And I think a couple of opportunities that come to play are, one, if I am activating and I don't have self-control on like when to harness that and when to release it and let it go, I'm going to potentially not allow my team to grow because I'm making the decisions. And so I have to really make sure that I'm using my best judgment and almost say, I need to take a step back and decline to speak first, decline to provide my opinion, because when I provide my opinion, it's strong. And that's, again, just like my communication style is direct. It has a high presence. And even sometimes where I'm like, it's an opinion, I could make an opinion up, but it comes across as I'm stating a fact. And so my team's like, well, Nick's already convicted, so we're just not going to say anything. And so I think that's where it can come out as an opportunity of like not enabling them or like not even feeling like they may have the floor to speak up because of that.
In fact, it reminds me, you've been doing something kind of unique in your team meetings. I'd love for you to share a little bit about, your own self-awareness, right, about that. And then you've kind of shifted a practice in your team meetings. Can you share a little bit about that idea?
Yeah, of course. So I was reading the book called Multipliers by Liz Wiseman. And there's this concept of like playing your chips. And basically the framework of this is that there are leaders that can just see problems and be potentially 4 steps ahead. I'm not saying that I'm always at that level, but there's things where things are running through my head and I just want to blurt them out. And basically using an opportunity to allow and empower your team to solve the problems instead of yourself, because that's going to increase ownership and understanding and ability. And so what I did is I realized, hey, I need to take a step back from these meetings and I need to find a time to pick and choose my words carefully. And so there's this concept of playing your poker chips. And so I bring 4 poker chips every single time that we have a director meeting. And those poker chips basically signify that that's my turn to talk. But when I play a poker chip, I only get 60 seconds. And so I have 4 poker chips to play, 60 seconds to make a statement. And so I have to do a really good job of either framing a situation, challenging, and also making sure that I'm listening to the conversation, and then enabling our team to fill in the rest of the gaps. And what that's done is it allows our team to kind of problem solve a little bit better, have some more conversation, struggle through some issues instead of maybe relying on me to ultimately make a call. I can frame it up. I can say, hey, I agree. But this has really allowed our team to speak more into the business and help them collaborate and solve problems together at a much higher and faster rate.
I love it. I'm so, yeah. What a great self-awareness for you to use, and what a limit. I mean, you're talking about an hour and a half meeting, and you're giving yourself 4 minutes to really speak. Now, I know you've said it doesn't mean you can't ask questions. Those are fair game along the way. But as far as like serious input or your opinion, or yeah, that you've given yourself total of 4 minutes. And have you always played your chips so far?
No, I haven't always played the chips. I think it's the beauty of it is, and I think that that is more of a testament to our team growing than it is me making like better decisions. I think it's like there was already beauty in that, and I just needed to let it happen. But I think it's funny. Like, I mean, my team loves this that I get to use the chips. I mean, I had 4 chips the other day, last Tuesday, and I made a 3-word comment, like, or 4 word. I said, we need to grow like dine it. And they're like, play a chip. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe I just said that. And I had to use a chip because you're like, you made a comment. You didn't like ask a question or
Wow.
anything like that. And so that
They're
was
holding
kind
you
of funny.
accountable.
They're holding me accountable. And so it's at the same time, like it's helping them being like, hey, like we got this. And they're helping me grow as well in those moments. But it's a fun way to do it.
How have they changed through this process?
Yeah, so I think the beauty is empowerment and ownership, and one of the areas like we want to grow in is like our leadership capacity and ownership. And I think about ownership, like where are teams doing really well? They're amazing at getting results. They're amazing at making plans to get the results and implementing them. But there's also this concept of ownership of like being able to articulate what they've done and to get into like the day-to-day, like, hey, this is what I do, but also share it in a way where it's compelling in framing that. And I think this like ability to allow them to talk more has allowed them to have the ownership, but it's helping them articulate a little bit more about what they're doing by giving them the platform of me speaking less, but also asking them really hard questions of like, hey, why'd you come up with that goal? What evidence do you have to support that? Instead of me just saying, hey, that's not good enough, or making a comment, or hey, this is where we need to be. And I think that that restraint from me and them being able to kind of have that platform has really helped them grow in their ownership, and specifically articulation of their business and what they're working on.
I love it. I love it. Such a beautiful picture of leadership and really thinking through your own words. But Nick, as you look at your leadership journey and even these leaders as they've grown, what would you point to and say there was a moment where it felt like a failure, but that ended up propelling you forward? Where would be a time that you would share related to that question?
Yeah, Jay, thanks for asking it. I think that this is an important thing to unpack for me and my journey and my team's journey and where we're headed. And it's been less than a year ago. So we were told no for a multi-restaurant opportunity back in October of 2023. All signs pointed towards a yes. We went through the interview process that happened very quickly. And during the visit, things didn't go great. And the feedback for us was that they did not believe that the leadership was ready to handle 2 restaurants, and they were not wanting to duplicate that. And that hurt, right? Like that was like really hurtful because you think you're ready for something, all signs point towards that, and then you get this no, and it's like final. It's not a no, like, hey, like you struck out, you got another at bat later on in, inning 7 compared to inning 4. You're like, hey, this is like a multi-year, potentially forever situation. And so dealing with the finality of that like really stung. And so um that was like a failure in the moment of like, dang, like 7 years working towards this, and was told no. And I don't know if there's ever going to be another opportunity. And so that's the failure part. Now, the propelling forward, I think we can unpack in a lot of different ways, but I think it really started with me first. And I think, like, first and foremost, before we even get to work, it was more like, okay, like, God, you can still be glorified in this situation. And I want to use this situation how he wants it to be used, and to glorify him in the midst of this, and say, I'm still leaning on God, and knowing that this is going to help my spiritual maturity. And I kept going back to James 1, like, when you face trials of many kinds, it doesn't say like if you do, it says when you will. And then it produces steadfastness, and let steadfastness have its full effect, so that you may be mature and complete, lacking in nothing. So these trials help like my own spiritual maturity. So like that helped me like get right with God, and knowing God is the prize. Then secondly was like, okay, what do I need to work on from my leadership based off of this and what I was hearing? And so to kind of give you a little bit of insight into the interview, I think the part that we struggled with the most was just our leaders unable to answer questions, or just struggling with like challenges, like going a third or fourth level deeper, and really struggling and almost freezing up at moments for that. I'm like, okay, what is going on? Like, what's the problem with that? And so we talked about, ownership at the beginning of our conversation. And so I was like, okay, they're getting the results. They know what they're doing. They understand how to implement it really, really, really well. They get Chick-fil-A. They cannot articulate what is going on. And I think what was happening is, as we talked about my leadership superpower, my kryptonite, is like they relied so heavily on me to talk about those things, and I was inherently good at them. And I was like, I'll just do it. Like that, they just were like, I'll take an active step back because this isn't really my jam. Like, I don't really like this anyway. Nick's good at it. Let's just let that happen. Well, when push comes to shove, they didn't want to hear, like the selection team didn't want to hear from me. They wanted to hear from them. And so I was like, okay, shoot. So like after the sting is removed, right? Like, what can you actually take away from this? It was important for me to recognize, like, I need to pull back on talking, like literally talking. And I need to lean into asking questions and pushing them to understand and share their vision more. And that's what we did. That's where we started going. And I think, that's at the heart of kind of when our relationship started too, Jay. We had a good conversation and said, I want our team to grow with leadership capacity. And you came out for a kind of like a retreat, so to speak. Wouldn't you say that? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
it was kind of your annual retreat. You were setting goals,
mm-hmm.
and we just had an opportunity to kind of think, okay, how can we use this as a moment to reset?
Yeah. And you asked me like, hey, like what's on your mind? Like, what do you want? What do you want in this season? And kind of shared, like my own personal journey, but then like, hey, what do you want for the team? And I was like, I want them to grow in their leadership capacity, and I want them to grow in their ownership and their level of ownership. And this is where like, I just think we had some game-changing moments. And, we started this new concept that you introduced to us that I would love to share regarding 9 boxes. So 9 boxes.
Go ahead. I think that'd be great. We haven't actually talked about this particular tool that we've created on the podcast. So I would love for you to kind of flesh out, like, what is 9 boxes? How do you use that? So go ahead and dive on in.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thanks for the opportunity. I hope that I can do it justice, but you kind of shared with me, like, before we had this retreat, I was like, hey, this is kind of like what I'm thinking for like ownership, and 9 boxes. And just to frame it up, like for those that haven't heard of it, is you think about like a regular sheet of paper. And if you draw 9 boxes in your sheet of paper, and you ask yourself the question, what are the 9 most important aspects in your restaurant? Whether it's like a work center or a specific focus that you have. And so like giving you some examples of like what that would look like, maybe drive through, food safety, kitchen, quality, and you go through those 9 things that each restaurant may think is the most important thing. And you say, hey, these are the 9 most important aspects of our restaurant. The next aspect is who is the owner of this box? The one single owner of that box, not 2, not 3, 1. And you have that person, they are in charge of that entire box. And so you then have owner, and then you say you have their name written. And then the third aspect of the 9 boxes for each box is the lag measure. And what a lag measure is just like the top level metric that you want to define as success, as a win. And I think it was really important of like defining the lag measure, Jay, like when we were having these conversations of like me not saying anything, having them think of it, like my team, and then asking them, okay, like, so like why? Like I agree with you, but why? How would you defend like that's important to you? How does that define excellence? And then going through that and fleshing that out a little bit more. But then the most important thing is the lead behaviors. And these are like the day-to-day activities or the actions that you're taking in the restaurant amidst the whirlwind. The important things that you're doing is like if you take these 3 to 4 key actions and you deploy them into your business, you're going to win and meet your lag measure and see progress. And so that's kind of framing up the 9 boxes. And so that's exactly what we did during the retreat, Jay. And got started in how we annual plan and how we increased overall ownership. So it helped very much clarify who's in charge of what they're going to be working on, and how they're going to get there. And that started kind of this year and seeing some progress.
I love it. And you did justice. Thank you. That was a great description. And I think for those of you who are familiar with 4 disciplines of execution, if you're listening to this and you recognize some of the elements there, and the idea is how do we take these amazing 4DX principles and use them? And so 9 boxes is a way to kind of map out our, individual area and the lag and the lead. And we've started talking about lead as a lead behavior because it's just a little bit easier term to think about. What are the 3 or 4 or 5 things that we do to hit our goal? But one, and as you were sharing that, it just, I'm super proud of how you've used it, and thank you for making it so effective in your organization. I think leaders, you turn to your leaders and you say, hey, what do y'all own? And typically leaders will say, well, we own it all. Like we have to watch everything. And if everybody's watching everything, no one's really watching anything, right? And so to help them focus in, and that's just kind of from the beginning, I think that was the spark where your leaders really grabbed onto this. They realized, oh wow, I can have one special area and I can really move that area and focus on it. So we've seen them really take it forward. Now y'all use that in your business planning, but it also comes right back to your team meeting. How do you use 9 boxes in your team meeting?
Good question. So I think this is like where we had to figure things out as we went. Cause like, as we implemented 9 boxes, we had a certain way that we were doing meetings, and it was based off of Chick-fil-A's 5 critical success factors. So those that are from Chick-fil-A understand it. Those that are not, I'm sorry that they don't quite get that, but there was just a certain way we were doing meetings, and it felt clunky. And so I was kind of asking, a question to some of our leaders. I'm like, hey guys, like what would it look like to align like how we're annual planning down to like a week to week level, and like really have some massive impact together where you guys are solving problems on a regular basis on some of the most important strategic bets is what we call them. in our restaurant, instead of just, the day-to-day whirlwind stuff that we're paying our directors and our team to be able to do. And so what we decided to do is put a disproportionate amount of time in our meetings focused on solving issues, specifically surrounding our three most important boxes that we call our strategic bets. And so our meeting's an hour and a half long. We spend like the first 30 minutes overviewing our scorecards, sharing like what our like keys to victory are, our 9 boxes. We call them our keys to victory, any kind of updates, but it's all information. There's not a lot of conversation at that time. It's kind of like the information dump. And then we're graduating to the latter half, the last hour, talking about solving a problem. More specifically, like I said, a big thing that we have. So for example, this year, one of our main focuses is to grow our mobile sales in the entire restaurant to 40% or higher. And last year we were at about 28, 29%. And this year we're at 38.5. And so we're continuing to grow that. But every single week, what's happening is we're coming up with either new ideas, or we're fleshing out ideas that have been put in past and kind of assessing, does the lead behavior work? But the third thing that's really cool is that we're writing down who's responsible for a specific action and getting everybody involved. And then they have to come to the table with an update of like, hey, Nick Dose, you said you were going to get this done on 5/17. Did you get it done? And I'm like, no. And then if you didn't get it done, you're like, okay, why? And it's really uncomfortable. But now we're more to, yes, we're getting it done. And here's what I'm learning, or here's what I'm seeing, or here's what I'm struggling with. Can I get some help? And then you have the right team in place, these influencers, the directors and senior directors, kind of helping provide solutions together as a group. And so I would say like advancing something like that, solving a problem from like 29% all the way up to 38% has been absolutely instrumental. And it's not something where you just do for 1 week. We've spent probably 2 months on this and just continue to refine the lead behaviors, the processes and systems. And when you refine them, we're also updating our 9 boxes just to make sure like, hey, like this is a living, breathing document. You don't have to be rigid. But it just kind of shows you how you've owned things, and it gives you credit to document that and keep it kind of as that living, breathing document. So that's one way we've brought like an annual plan up here down to like the week to week level with our leadership team.
That's so good. And so just for clarity here, who owns Mobile Through then? Who has that box?
Yeah, so our drive-through director owns Mobile Through.
Okay.
And so when we're talking about Mobile Through, that individual is the one that owns it. So he's responsible in those big picture situations to like frame the current scenario of like, hey guys, here's all the data that we have. Here's what's going on. Here's what we're doing really well. And here's what we're struggling with. And then here's some questions that I have for you. And so it's really important to frame the question. And the only way that he can frame the question is if he's a subject matter expert and understands it. And where I was seeing our initial problem at the beginning of this year, because it's a journey, was that we were just like, hey, we're digging in. We know our main leg measure. But then when we were talking about it, we were talking in generalities a lot. And I was thinking to myself, I'm like, something's not right. And you and I were having a conversation. I was like, do you think that they like are looking at all of the things that may be influencing that? And I'm like, that's a great question, Jay. And I think the answer is no, but let me go ask. And sooner or later, I was like, hey, like what other results or reports are you guys looking at to find this? And they didn't really give me much. And I was like, may I suggest to you to start looking at a few other reports, and those reports will help tell the story of why we're at where we're at. And for some reason or another, and I appreciate that advice, is it clicked for them. They're like, that's the only way that I'm going to know why things are going the way that they're going. And that's ultimately what's influencing the main result. And so they were able to better frame those questions, kind of coming back to the meeting. And we were able to have more fruitful meetings focused on solving problems and making progress, which has been such a blessing. So,
I love
I
it.
mean, that's just one example that's kind of come to life at our restaurant or our organization this year.
What a great example. And one of the reasons I was asking about that, who's in charge of mobile through, is because, the way you framed this conversation, you said yes, we go through all the boxes, we know what's happening, and that's kind of information, but then we hone in on one topic, maybe one box or one part of a box, and you highlight that for the rest of the meeting. But I think it's important to recognize there's still one owner on that. It's just that we've all, and Pat Lencioni talks about this, where he talks about team of one, and where all the VPs of the organization should take off their individual, sales hat or whatever area they're in, and they should then not be advocating just for their area. They're looking at this. Okay, what does the business need? The business needs mobile through to grow. Okay, what can we all get our mind and ideas and brain wrapped around that need? Now, I might have something from my box that plays into this, but it may just be all to support this leader. And also, the other point of this is it's not a democracy. That owner still is a director. They still own the decisions of that area. We're all giving input and ideas. We're not outvoting them or, overriding their authority in mobile or in drive-through. And so these principles play out really well using nine boxes.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing the additional perspective. But yeah, it's been a game changer for that. In that level, and just kind of increasing ownership for them, and just empowering them to make these calls. And the beauty is like everything that we're focused on this year is seeing an improvement. And like mobile is a great example, but there's been a plethora of other amazing wins that we could share and go on and on, but I won't bore you with the details. But my point is, and why I'm saying that is that 9 boxes really was the catalyst that helped increase ownership and therefore increase business results because of that ownership. Our team was seeing progress and purpose and increased their engagement and propelled them forward to get great business results.
What a great story. Thanks for unpacking that for us and
My
showing us
pleasure.
a real life example of a team who is success. Your team was already successful. You had an amazing team,
Very solid.
but
Absolutely.
absolutely so. You had so much confidence in them, but their professionalism has shifted dramatically in the last 6 or 8 months to where they're able to be subject matter experts in their area and be able to talk very deeply about intentionality for moving those numbers forward. So good leadership from you, and self leadership on yourself. It sounds like that was really a turning point, was your own self leadership that led to all this other leadership for them.
I mean, I certainly hope so. I appreciate the compliment. I,
Sure.
I I don't want to make this about me. I think it was just a little bit of self awareness for me of like how am I holding them back? Um, and so I had to make some adjustments. I don't think that they were like major overhauls either. I think it was just the self discipline of being aware and also knowing when to use my strengths and when to not use them. And it allowed the team to kind of fly a little bit. And so I might have been holding them back in their cages just a tad and just needed to make that adjustment. I was like, oh, I'm standing in their way. Like, let's go. And so now we're on that journey. And each week, progress is better and better.
How has trust, just the idea of trust among you and your leaders, how has that shifted in the last several months?
I think trust has always been there. I think trust is like there's a lot of elements to trust, right? So I think a couple of elements, first and foremost, of like, hey, why do you want to work for me? I think there's two elements of trust there. Is like, is that person for me? And like, are they relating to like the things that I want to do? Are they for my good? Right? And I think those elements have never changed, right? I think where trust has elevated is, do they have the competency to do their jobs well. And I think about that as far as articulation and ownership of their business a little bit more. And so I think the trust from director to me, I have higher trust in them, but I think they also then have higher trust in me because they're like, he's allowing me to just kind of roll. Like, he's like, here's your framework, but you can go anywhere in the world in the framework. And I think that that's been kind of like how we've been elevating trust with one another is we provide the framework, but they can do whatever they need to do. But in the beauty of that, they've been able to show their competency and track record of results. They're already getting amazing results. And now it's like, just like going a little bit further. And I'm just proud of them for that. So I think the trust and the competency and the track record of results is how we've been able to elevate one another in that way. But for each other and like has best interest in mind, I think that those two aspects have already been there.
I noticed a strong, when I first met you and your team, I noticed a really strong chemistry of trust. And I can see what you're saying here. And there's kind of that now, this other type of trust where they're like unleashed. They're just ready. They're able to run. I love that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm sure it's freeing to them, as well. And so I'm super thankful and I know one of my leaders, he even made mention, he's like, I've talked to my wife, like, Nick, you changed the way that you do your, even your one-on-ones with me. And I've been like, this is awesome. Like, I'm like, so for a good way. And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, cool. It's good to get that reinforcement, and hearing that, like, the changes that you're making are impacting them on a personal level, like where it's like at their dinner table. And I think sometimes you never know. Right. And so getting those small glimpses into their lives and hearing that that's making an impact, kind of propels you forward, every day.
So good. Which, comes back full circle to some of those early searching moments that you had and looking for the right career you were looking for values and family and impact and leadership. And, that just is continuing to grow. You have all this space to be able to live that out right here with your team. So good job, Nick. You're a great leader. And I look forward to the days ahead of seeing your team grow and you grow and just that impact you're going to have on your team and your community.
Thanks, Jay. Appreciate the compliments. Thanks for having me on the podcast today. Super thankful. And it's a journey, but we're going to continue on it. And, by God's grace, we'll continue to grow and develop.
Well, Nick, thanks for being on the show and taking the time. Can't wait to get this story out and share it with the world.
Thank you for listening to Build Your Culture Brand with Dr. Jay Rains. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, comment, and share. See you next time. We would like to note that LeadersQ serves individual owner-operators and their teams and is not affiliated, endorsed by, or in any way officially connected with Chick-fil-A Incorporated.